All right, welcome everybody to Embracing Radical Change. I am your host, Jocelyn Mercado, and in this event, you are invited to join with us in global conversations with 27 cutting-edge experts and thought leaders who will guide you to connect with the truth in your heart, to unlearn the illusions of our modern world, and to activate bold new perspectives about the future of humanity. And today, I am truly honored to present Charles Eisenstein. Welcome, Charles. Thank you for
Hi.
being part of the event.
Hello. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. And so, Charles, I first found out about your work through the Pachamama Alliance and have been just so inspired by your work over the years, especially Sacred Economics, and now by your new book, Climate, A New Story. So it's really, really wonderful to have you here as a part of Embracing Radical Change.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I love your topic for today. Come on, is Earth really alive? Absolutely love it. So let's dive into that. So as a place to get started, you've written Sacred Economics and also this book about climate change. So in what ways are these two topics intertwined?
Well, I mean, certainly on one level, pretty much everybody knows that when you really start to dig down and ask, why are we meaning the dominant civilization of humanity, why are we destroying life on Earth? The answers that come up often have something to do with money. So I think that any analysis of the ecological crisis that doesn't take the economic system into account is going to be missing something. And if we try to change our behavior, but leave intact the economic motivation for our behavior, then we're going to be swimming against the current. So that's one way that they're intertwined. And on a deeper level, the way that we treat the planet and the way that we treat each other and the way that we see the world, both economically and ecologically, are rooted in the same deep assumption set of separation, control, and transcendence, competition, anxiety. Like all of these things are built into our systems on a really deep level. So, I mean, I could go more into that, but those are two of the two ways that these two topics are conjoined.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I know you speak and have spoken a lot about the story of separation. Could you tell us a little more in detail about that?
Okay. This is something I talk about a lot. So sometimes I wonder, okay, everyone's probably already heard this before.
It's so important though.
And it's also like something intuitively obvious to people. When I say story of separation, people know what I mean. But explicitly, I'm talking about the mythology of our civilization that answers the questions: who are you? Who is humanity? Why are we here? What's real? What's important? How does change happen in the world? We have an answer set to these questions that essentially says that who you are is an individual in a world of other. It could be a soul encased in flesh. It could be an expression of DNA programming you to maximize reproductive self-interest. It could be a bubble of psychology inside of a fleshy machine. Religion, psychology, philosophy, economics, science all have a different answer to this, but it's still basically an individual in a world that is separate from you. So in this mythology, what happens in the world need not affect you, especially if you can exert control over the world, because it consists of these random particles and forces that don't care about human beings, that have no purpose or consciousness or intelligence of their own. Therefore, human progress means to extend control and impose design and impose intelligence onto this random dead world outside of ourselves. And individual well-being also comes through control and through dominating and outcompeting all of the other separate selves out there. So you can see that this basic mentality of separation motivates the destruction of nature, and also the economic system, which embodies separation, competition, endless growth, and so on. So that's, in a nutshell, that's the story of separation.
Yes, yes. And we're so deeply intertwined with it. You know, I know that all of us on this call today, myself included, feel, for example, that we're so intertwined with the financial piece of the fossil fuel industry, right? Where we want to stop using fossil fuels, but we still need our car to drive to work, or, you know, something along those lines. And so what would you say? What would you say about that? As I know, well, I'll share one more thing. I was at an event where you were speaking this summer in Pennsylvania, and I was really struck by something that you said, and I will try to paraphrase. It was something along the lines of, you know, maybe the answers that we need are not in, you know, solar panels or more efficient cars, but maybe the answers that we need are in songs and ceremony. It was something to that effect that you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Where to begin with that? So when we're confronted, and this is probably true of most people, including myself, and collectively as well, when we're confronted with a crisis, the first response is to try even harder doing the kinds of things that have worked in the past, or the kind of things that we know how to do. So here we're confronted with an ecological crisis, and our habit and pattern of response to any crisis is first to find an enemy, to find a culprit, to find a single cause for the problem, and then to fight that enemy, that culprit, or that cause. It's a pattern that you can see in Hollywood movies. Like, I'm trying to find movies for my 5-year-old son that are not about evil people, evil villains causing a problem, and the problem being solved by killing the villains.
Wow. Yeah.
It's hard to find one. Maybe like some Miyazaki movies, you know, like there's a few outliers, but generally speaking, the problem is evil.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's in Hollywood, it's in agriculture. You find something to kill, and your problem is solved. It's in medicine. It's in all kinds of self-improvement things, even, where you find the negativity, or you find the bad part of yourself, and you override that, or suppress that, or eliminate the negative thinking, or something like that. Here's the bad thing. So in climate change, so here we have a horrendous ecological crisis. Life is dying all over the world. And so that pattern begins with find the culprit. Okay, greenhouse gases. Or it could be evil fossil fuel companies and their evil executives and evil politicians. Or if we're a little bit too polite to call them evil, we use some thinly disguised equivalent, greedy or ignorant or whatever. And then we know what to do. We fight these people, or we fight the greenhouse gases. We try to, it's like, if you're overweight, then find the enemy, calories. Solution, reduce the calories. But I am troubled by this conversion, or this identification of ecological health with greenhouse gas levels. And I find that many of the things that are being done from that paradigm are actually making the problem worse, or they are ignoring really important elements of that crisis that become visible when we look at the planet as alive and not as this geomechanical device that we can tinker with the inputs and outputs, the levels of greenhouse gases as if it were like a diesel engine and we were tinkering with the air fuel mixture. But like what gets left out from consideration when we obsess over greenhouse gases? Things like sea turtles. Like, what's their carbon sequestration contribution? It's very hard to quantify that. So we tend to focus on the things that are easy to quantify and leave out the rest. So as far as like, solar panels and wind turbines, I've always loved solar panels because they make clean energy. I liked the idea even before climate change was a thing. Now it turns out that it's kind of problematic, the waste and pollution that are produced in their manufacture and their disposal when they reach the end of their lifespan, and even like really potent greenhouse gases that are produced when you manufacture solar panels. But if those things are not included in the numbers, then it looks really good. Same thing with mega dams and biofuels plantations and things like that, that actually do a lot of ecological harm, but it's not visible from that way of seeing. So that way of seeing at a deep level is about seeing the world through the lens of number, through the lens of quantity, through the engineering perspective. And that way of seeing the world is part of the story of separation. That what is real is what we can measure. And that's why in that gathering that you were at, I made that comment about maybe we need to rely more on ritual and song. And really what I was saying is that when we question our fundamental way of knowing about the world and our problem-solving patterns, that opens the door to things that have been excluded from that paradigm. So let me know if I'm going on too long with this question.
No, go right ahead.
Okay. So, I talk to Indigenous people sometimes, or people who work with Indigenous people, and I say, well, what do you think is causing climate change? And often they say things like, it's because you've ceased doing the proper ceremonies. It's because, some Dogon told me, it's because you've removed sacred artifacts and relics from the places where they were ceremonially placed on Earth to maintain the covenant between humans and the rest of nature. And you've taken them away from those places and put them in museums in New York. So, of course, the planet is no longer going to be dysregulated. Or they say, I've heard that it's because we're taking gold out of the mountains in the Andes and elsewhere. And the gold is the heart of the mountain. And how can the mountain exercise its sovereignty over the land when it doesn't have its heart? So are these should we just dismiss these as superstitious nonsense because we know better than you how the world works? Or should we start listening to these things? And that doesn't mean to ignore science, but it means to expand the scope of our understanding and to take in the perspectives that have been marginalized as part of the same marginalization that is called development, that says our way of life is better than yours. To develop means to build industry, to build roads, to build an electrical grid, to use tractors instead of hand implements, to develop, to mine your metals, to cut down your trees. That's what development has been, because we know how to do this better than you. We know how to live better than you. We know how to learn. We know how to know better than you. And this ascent of humanity that we've called development, thinking ourselves to be at the pinnacle of it, it's not working so well anymore. And many, many people are doubting that we're even on the right path. Therefore, the arrogance with which we approach other cultures is perhaps wearing thin now. And we're open to maybe we don't really understand how this planet works. And that's where I advocate a living planet view of Earth and the ecological crisis that basically is saying our industrial economy is destroying the organs and tissues of a living being. And if we continue to do that, to clear cut the Amazon, to destroy the mangroves, the wetlands, the seagrass meadows, all of these ecosystems, the elephants, the whales, the soil, then even if we cut emissions to zero, Earth will still die a death of a million cuts. And if these systems are strong, then greenhouse gases might not even be such a big problem. So it's not an either or. Like, given that there are like half the number of trees there were 100 years ago, given that fish biomass has decreased by like 50% over my lifetime, given the insect holocaust, something like 75% decrease in flying insect biomass over 30 years, given all of this, Earth is in a pretty fragile state. And I guess another part of it is that human beings are part of this living planet too. We are an organ of Gaia as well. And we have, in a new story, in a story of interconnection, interbeing, we understand that Earth's climate cannot be healthy if the political climate, the social climate, the psychic climate is not healthy. That a disturbance in one is going to cause a disturbance in the other. And therefore, that work that seems irrelevant in the face of catastrophic global warming, we can understand is actually really important. Like, what if you're working with incarcerated men? What if you're working with homeless people? What if you're doing hospice work? What if you're a seed saver? What if you're trying to save the sea turtles? What if you're trying to revitalize dying languages? From the climate change perspective, you're wasting your time because we've got a 10-year window for action and otherwise nothing else matters, But from a more holistic understanding, we can recognize all of these activities as changing the base level for ecocide, for the killing of the Earth. Another way to look at it is from what state of being does the endless hunger to consume come from? Like, where does greed come from, for example? Is greed just some enemy, some wicked thing that we have to extirpate from our being? And the greedy among us need to be, like, where does greed come from? And I could, offer my answer to that question, but I won't, because I think that this is the kind of question we need to ask. Because if we don't change that base level, then we are going to fight an endless war. It's like, it's like trying to end terrorism with bombs and drones, continuing to breed conditions for more terrorism. It's like trying to end crime by incarcerating men, breeding conditions for more crime, or ignoring the conditions that generate crime. So yeah, maybe I'll stop with that for the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing all of this. It's so powerful for me to hear. I hadn't heard that statement from Indigenous peoples that, removing these sacred artifacts from the land and placing them in museums, that's really, really moving. And something that you mentioned there in the middle is that, we tend to think of this ancient and indigenous wisdom and science being like opposites. But the more that we delve into, physics and different branches of science, the more we find that actually the ancient traditions are very scientific, right? And that these, thinking of gold as the heart of the mountain may be an extremely scientific view, that it's all one. So yeah, thank you for for sharing about that.
Yeah. I mean, some indigenous teachings do fit quite well into science. Like you can give ecological explanations for, there's one I mentioned in my book that I think originally came from one of the permaculture pioneers, but it was that Native people in the American Southwest said the prairie dogs cry for the rain. If you kill the prairie dogs, the rains will stop. And scientists were very amused by this, thinking, how could that possibly be? And advocated eradicating prairie dogs because they are damaging fragile desert grasses and stuff, and the desert would be better off without them. And when they eradicated them, the rain stopped. Turned out, a couple explanations for that, but their burrows allow rain to penetrate into the, when there's heavy rain, it penetrates more, and so it nourishes a longer
Wow.
Wet season and prevents droughts, and also like act as alveoli when tidal forces pull water up or something like that. Like there actually is a scientific explanation. Mm. So what's tempting then is to say, well, they were just astute observers of nature, but it's not really that the prairie dogs are crying for the rain. We know better than that. So I think it's not surprising that there is sometimes a confluence of knowledge between the scientific way of knowing and indigenous ways of knowing. But to reduce one to the other is arrogant and dangerous, because some things might be a lot easier to see from one or the other. And I like to take indigenous explanations for the world at face value, even if they might seem ridiculous. A friend of mine who did a lot of sea turtle conservation work in a mystical communication with the sea turtles realized that the sea turtles carry the world on their back. Mm. So what does that mean? Like we might be able to translate that into some ecological reasoning where they maybe occupy a keystone niche in the food web, and their elimination sets off a trophic cascade that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like we might be able to explain it in that way. But then, however we can quantify their contribution, if we then translate that quantification into policy and say, okay, sea turtles are this valuable. The rainforest, it sequesters X million tons of carbon, so it's this valuable. And we assign a value to everything. This is one of those customary, comfortable ways of problem solving. You make a budget, you assign a number to everything, and then you sacrifice some of this and do some of that, and as long as the numbers add up, you're fine. You can cut down the Amazon and plant a tree plantation somewhere else, cut down 100 hectares of Amazon, put some solar panels somewhere, and do the math, and it's carbon neutral. But what gets left out are the things that we can't measure or that we choose not to measure. And this points to what I think is a serious deficiency in our mythology that names the measurable as real. And that's essentially what science says. The measurable is what is real. And human progress in knowledge means bringing more and more into the realm of what we can measure. Yeah. And I think we need to be seeing things now and valuing things that we can't easily measure, like beauty, like sacredness.
Yes. Yes, I agree. Yes, and I love how you in all of your work, you bring the reader back to the sacredness of things. I feel that that's so important. I have another question going back to your climate book. Could you share with us what was the biggest surprise that you came across in your research as you were working on that book?
I guess I'm not sure if this qualifies as a surprise, but I had this feeling that if we were that if we were going to focus on one substance, it should be water and not carbon. That somehow, if we don't take care of water, then it's going to have terrible effects on climate. And I was surprised by how much research there is that confirms that view. That a lot of the things that we blame on global warming are actually caused by disruptions in the water cycle, mostly through abuse of soil and destruction of forests and wetlands. So a lot of flooding, a lot of droughts, disrupted weather patterns, and so forth. Even heating. Forests cool the surface by evaporating water. They have all these leaves, that transpire water, and as it evaporates, it cools, and then it rises up into the atmosphere, condenses, and releases the heat much higher up. Some of it radiates off into space. Then whether or not it radiates off into space, then as it condenses, it generates a low pressure zone that then pulls moisture-laden air in from the oceans. So forests actually bring rain. They don't just recycle water as rain, although they do that too, and that's important. So then when you cut them down, the rain no longer is, filtering through a leaf litter and understory and soaking into the ground. Instead, it runs off, doesn't soak into doesn't replenish the aquifers. So it's not available to water the plants past the rainy season. So then there's droughts, and because there's no, I don't know how sciencey I should get here, but yeah, if there's no.
I crowd like science generally. Well, okay. It's all about science combined with spirit, so yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So and then when the rains do come, the heavy rains do come, there's no sponge to soak them up. And so they run off quickly and create huge floods. And then, that often gets blamed on climate change, as in global warming, as in greenhouse gas induced global warming. And like that could be a factor too, but it's ignoring other sources of harm that are often a lot closer to home, rather than one abstract global thing, like what's happening here, what's happening locally that we could actually do something about, that calls us into love. Yeah, and I would like to talk about love at some point in this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yes, if it ties in here, then we'll come right ahead.
Well, I noticed a kind of a change in environmental rhetoric, maybe starting in the 80s, whereas it had been about save the whales. Why? Because they're so beautiful. Like there was not a self-interested reason why we should save the whales. Then climate change came along, and the reasons that we were given were because if we don't change, terrible things will happen to us. And I don't think that that is enough of a reason to inspire courage. When you appeal to self-interest and strengthen the field of self-interest, then, face it, most of the things that people are doing out of self-interest are making the situation worse on this planet. not better. Like what's in your self-interest is for everybody else to cut emissions and not you. Every other city to do it, every other country to do it, and not you. So one example I give, so I have a 5-year-old son. And what if I said to you, what a nuisance he is and expensive too, to feed him all the time and send him to school. And how about if I just, abandon him on the street or sell him to a coal mine or something like that? And you said, Charles, if you do that, then what will the neighbors think of you? And you might get in trouble with the law, and he won't support you in your old age. And I say, yeah, you're right. I better take better care of him. Like that whole conversation presupposes that I don't love my child.
Right.
So you have to appeal to self-interest. And I think that the story that we hold about somebody is an invitation for them to be in that story. So if we hold a story about people in society, in industry, in politics that says, I know you don't actually care about life on Earth, so here's a reason. Here's a financial reason. Here's a self-interested reason why you should care. You'll get negative PR consequences if you keep polluting. You'll get sued. You'll get shamed, etc. But I know you don't really care. I think that if we hold that story and act from that story, that you don't care, the only option we give ourselves basically is to fight a war and to defeat the uncaring, nature-hating people in a war, which is hopeless because they've got most of the power. They've got most of the money. They have the media. They have the military-industrial complex. An alternative story is that we have an innate love of life, an innate love of this planet, and a yearning to serve life. And that sometimes is deeply buried in some people, or it clashes with economic incentives. But if we can recognize that and speak to that and invite that, then that, I think, is the source of courage. Mm-hmm. Yes. People have to do something for love that is not in their self-interest. And how do you create conditions for that? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And then it goes so much deeper than the financial concerns or the fear concerns, because that also puts us in a place of fear, right? If we're saying save the whales because if we don't, something terrible will happen, it puts us in this place of fear, and then we want to get control of it again, and it sends us back on that whole spiral.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's not just environmentalism. I'm thinking right now of all of the issues that the Brett Kavanaugh hearings brought up, and kind of this idea that the way to stop violence against women is to hold men to account, to make sure that they suffer consequences if they do that, to make those consequences known. And like, certainly there's a time and a place to say stop or else. But one thing that I feel as a man is that it's actually not my nature to harm and abuse women. It's quite the opposite. And I believe that is true of all, or at least most men. So then I ask the question, what does it take to turn that into its opposite? What has to happen to a boy and what has to happen to a man? And how can we access the part of a man that would lay down his life to protect a woman he loves, or even to protect a stranger? Like, because we see that too. So it comes down to, how do we see each other, and how can we access the most beautiful parts of other human beings and hold a story that allows for that? And what stops us from doing that? What judgments get in the way? And what pain do those judgments come from? And so this is not about letting the polluters get away with it, letting the abusers off the hook, letting the, misogynists of giving them a free pass. It's about actually changing the conditions that generate all of this behavior. Because I want it to stop. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, what do you think? How can we create those conditions? I would love to hear what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, I guess my answer would be different depending on which issue we're talking about. As far as to elicit love of nature, love for the earth, I think experiences of intimacy and connection, grief, loss, beauty, they put us in touch with that part of ourselves. I quote the Akogi shaman in the book, who said, "If you knew she could feel, you would stop." He was talking about destruction of wetlands and rainforests. And he was saying, if you knew that this was an actual being that can feel, that is conscious, then you wouldn't be able to do that anymore. You can only do that because you see it as, 2 million board feet of lumber, or you see that as some land to develop. And I think the same is true of violence against women. It's enabled by objectification and dehumanization. Violence against other races, enabled by objectification and dehumanization. If you see somebody as less than fully human, less than a full self, then that seeing gets in the way of empathy, gets in the way of knowing that she can feel. So that's one thing and I think like the Kavanaugh hearings actually did that for a lot of men. Like here was this woman who was, I don't know, like I can't prove that she actually remembered correctly that Brett Kavanaugh did this to her, but if it wasn't him, it was somebody. Like this experience happened, and you watch that and you're like, you kind of know what it was like to be her. So it evoked empathy, I think, in a lot of people, even if they're politically conservative and say that they don't believe her. Like I think it probably got under a lot of people's skin, and I think that the result will be that it does kind of move the collective mind a little bit more toward knowing that, yeah, she can feel. The other thing that gets in the way is trauma. When people dehumanize others, it's not just an ideology, like this intellectual construct. It is also like that ideology is attracted to a wounded state of being. It's pretty hard to traumatize other people if you have not suffered trauma yourself. And we have thousands of years of collective trauma in every lineage. So the damage we're seeing playing out in the ecological realm is the exteriorization of this trauma. And it will not stop until we have gone through some healing among ourselves and within ourselves as well. Each level mirrors the other. And that's, again, like to say that if your work in the world is, you're a therapist, you're a healer, like you're also helping heal the ecological crisis.
Yes.
Because traumatized, hurting, wounded people, cut off from their empathy, cut off from their emotion, cut off from compassion, they're going to continue doing things that harm other beings, whether it's women or trees or soil or water.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for all of that. And I know, I feel so strongly that when we follow what our heart wants us to do, right, in our life, as far as how we want to create a living and help other people, when we follow our heart with that, it will lead us to some way that we're meant to change the world, and I know that the people who are listening feel that very strongly. I just wanted to point this out as, your words as real empowerment to everybody to really step into what you believe in and what you love, because it is important, as you've said here, whether you're helping the sea turtles or helping people who are incarcerated or a therapist, it's so important, and it is contributing to the brighter future that we want.
Yeah. And I want to say that surveying the situation on this planet, like, I understand why people get hopeless. The crisis on every level and every realm is horrifying. According to what we conventionally understand as possible, it is impossible for there to be healing. The situation's far too gone. Maybe some of you on this call have experienced things happening in your life that were not possible, according to what we grew up being told is possible. So when I hear about, a miraculous recovery from stage 4 cancer or some other miracle, I always ask, what's the equivalent? If that can happen to a human body, what's the equivalent for the political body, the body politic, or the ecological body? And when you accept that human beings are not the sole repositories of consciousness and selfhood, but that nature, that the whole planet is conscious, that the cosmos is conscious, then it's no longer up to us and to save the world. Instead, we can see ourselves as participating in a healing process, understanding that there could be this coordinating intelligence far beyond our comprehension that deploys each one of us in exactly the right spot for our gifts to be useful. Then the question becomes, how do I serve this coordinating intelligence? How do I know what my right action is in the place that I'm deployed? The intelligence then communicates to us through our primary listening organ of the heart that guides us to the appropriate action, even when our minds cannot explain how this is going to save the planet. It might be some tiny invisible action that no one ever finds out about and is not ever celebrated by anybody. But we feel in that moment, this is what I'm supposed to be doing right now. You got to listen to that, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I so deeply agree with what you're saying here. And I would love to hear more about what you said about, if we see someone that heals from stage 4 cancer and goes on to live a long, healthy life. What does that mean for what we can do in either for the earth or for all these different, politically. So how we're here to talk about this subject of embracing radical change, right? And so how can we work with that? Or maybe, what is an example of something that you've seen that gives you hope where change has happened that is outside of what we consider normal?
I guess I should say a close relative of mine, since this is a public forum, a close relative of mine was diagnosed with metastatic pancreatic cancer, which is normally quite a quick death sentence. And she pursued a alternative modality that my wife and I have explored and know like the best practitioners of, and her, now it's like 2 months later, she's put on weight again after going down to 100 pounds. Her energy levels are higher. She doesn't look like a dying person. Wow. And it's, no, I don't know, like she could still keel over overnight. I mean, who knows, you know what I mean? But I guess for me, like a lot of the experiences have come in the area of health and wellness. Another kind of violation of what I've been told is possible has come in kind of personal relationships, witnessing forgiveness and generosity that don't fit into the story of the separate self, especially generosity. Like anytime you encounter extreme generosity, it is a signal that the world does not work the way we've been told, where everybody's out for themselves. Right now, we live in a matrix where it looks like everyone's out for themselves. Even you go online and you are shopping for some product, orange tinted glasses, say. I hope everybody uses these when you look at screens, by the way. The blue light is really bad for your brain. So you go online, orange tinted glasses, and here's the identical model. And on this website, they're $15, and on that website, they're $20. So of course you think, well, I'm going to go for the ones that cost $20 because I want those people to make a nice profit and pay their employees well and have abundance to take care of their children. Is that what you do?
Probably not.
Probably not. Probably you pick $15. So there you are trying to get the best deal. And this is the water in which we swim. And yeah, you encounter some great online program, and there's a little part of your brain that's like, okay, how are they monetizing this? How are they trying to get something from me? So when we encounter like generosity, it provides an anomalous data point that can unravel the story. And perhaps if we want to not only embrace radical change, but become agents of radical change, we can see our role as being to disrupt the story of separation, disrupt the story of greed, of control, of domination, to become a walking exception to those stories, to live in a different reality, to live in a reality in which, as I give, so I shall receive. A reality of the reason I'm here is not to maximize self-interest, but it is to serve what is beautiful to me. To live in the reality of everything that happens to another person happens to me on some level. To live in a reality of whatever I judge in somebody is showing me something about myself. And then we become invitations for others to be in that reality too, just as we've been invited into that reality through the generous people, the loving people, the miraculous events of our lives. And then, so we pass it on to others. And as a group, we begin to transition out of the story of separation.
Yeah, and I would dare to say, and from some experiments I've conducted in these realms, that as we allow ourselves to perceive that things can be different, we will see more and more of this which we want to bring in, of a new, more sacred way of living. That just shifting our mindset about it can begin to let it in for each of us already.
Yeah, and I find that. So one of the patterns that I'm a little wary of is the pattern of, okay, here's the thing that you have to do. Mm-hmm. And it could be surrender, or it could be shift your mindset or something like that. The insidious part of that is that when you then begin to have experiences beyond your old reality, when you begin to become more conscious, then you kind of take credit for it, because this is the result of something I did. Uh-huh. But when I really look at it, I find that to shift my mindset about something, I've always gotten help. That could be through an experience that came purely by grace. Mm-hmm. And I think that these experiences come to us magnetized to our inner yearning and readiness for those experiences. And the readiness comes through the ripening of the state of being that we had been in prior to that experience, which might need to be fulfilled. Like there might be a cosmic reason why you have to spend 20 years or 30 years or 40 years mired in victim mentality or something like that, caught up in an addictive loop. And when that experience reaches its fulfillment, then it attracts in the help that is needed to get out of that. And then I even know what to shift my mindset to. Like there's a break in the clouds, and I say, oh, the sky is higher than I thought, and it's blue, and I never knew that. And then like the break in the clouds might cloud over again. It might cloud over again, and I'm like, did I even see that? No. Here's what the sky looks like. The sky is gray and dark. That must have been my imagination. But then it happens again. And then it happens again. And eventually I accept that there is more to reality and to possibility and to myself and to life than I had accepted.
Yes, yes. And that it is part of what you mentioned earlier, that there's this higher intelligence guiding us and creating those openings for us.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for all that you've shared here. I think timing wise, we can go to the Q&A pretty soon, but I wanted to ask if there's anything else you wanted to say before we finish this segment of the interview.
I'm happy to go to the Q&A. There's, I think whatever else I want to say will probably come out through that.
Okay. Yes. And also I do want to mention your free gift, or actually there are a couple of free gifts that you are sharing with the audience. And one is that when I first reached out to you, you wanted to make sure that that your interview would be provided to all attendees completely free. So I want to let everybody who's watching live or listening to this as a recording know that you will receive this interview in audio and video format completely free. I'll send that to everybody in an email, and that is a gift from Charles. And also that the full text of all of your books are available free online as well.
Yeah, the new book we haven't had a chance to put that up on the website yet, but
okay.
Basically I use a gift model. So free isn't quite the right word for it. It's that I don't like to put anything behind a paywall, just because I'm like, I want people to hear this. Why would I keep it away from them? So the way I do it is I say, yeah, this is my gift, and if you want to make a return gift, you can do that, whatever, by my website or Patreon or something like that. Or if it's a live event, then people who come choose what the appropriate tuition or fee is, and that way, people who don't have a lot of money, they don't have to pay. People who are financially abundant can subsidize others and support my work, and kind of keep me going. So it feels, in a way, actually, it feels more abundant for me to do it that way, because I'm sinking into a feeling of trust that it'll be fine. So anyway, that's but yeah, you could just say that I'm doing it for free as well. But I like to add that awareness in there.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And yes, I'll take the word free off, because that makes all the sense in the world, what you're saying there. So
you can say as a gift or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
And and everyone who is watching this as a recording, to see all of Charles' books that are available online, just scroll down a little bit below the video and you'll see the link right there, and you can click through to his website and see those books. So with that, and also I'll put that link in the chat here for those who are on live. Okay, wonderful. So we can go over to the Q&A now, and anyone who would like to ask Charles a question, go ahead and raise your hand, and you can find the On the Zoom screen, if you look in the bottom center, there's a hand icon, and you can just click on that and it will say raise hand, and you will pop up in the queue here. And so, Laura, I'm going to bring you over first. Ask a question. There's Laura. Okay. Welcome, Laura. All right, we should be able to hear you now.
Hi,
Hi, welcome.
yes, thank you. And I live in an area with terrible internet, so if I go in and out, and you can cut me off. Okay. So Charles and I actually met once back in at Occupy Wall Street, and I know you mentioned me actually in one of your books, because I was the one whose dad was a Marxist and couldn't understand why I was running a women's circle at Occupy. And since then, so much of my life has been about following joy and following love and being very generous. I dropped out of academia and a PhD and became a birth doula and then a healer in many ways. And I've noticed, you know, when I do work these days, it's often with college kids. And what I do is I cultivate spaces where they can feel genuine and authentic, and a safe space where they can admit that they don't care about university, for example, or, you know, whatever it is. And I'm noticing that the one way in which I am not authentic with them is, and I'm authentic in all kinds of ways, other ways, including that I talk about my history as an addict and so on. But the one way I'm not authentic is by admitting that what I do for a living, and which includes working with them, is not sustaining me financially. And it's hard to talk about in the spiritual community too, because there's a lot of talk about how if you follow your joy, the universe, you know, we've all heard that story. There's many a TED talk that follows that story. And there's not a single decision I've made in the last 5 years, really, that hasn't been about following that instinct within me. And yeah, I come from a Marxist background, so I get the economics behind it. And, you know, in sacred economics, you talk about, you know, if you're not getting a return on your investment, you're probably doing the right thing. So I'm not really questioning that I'm doing the right thing, but I am also aware that I feel a little financially desperate right now. So yeah, I just wanted to lay that out.
I love this question. Thank you. Really, I love your transparency and humility. This is the question I get probably more than anything else. This kind of issue is coming up for so many people, and I do not think that there's some trivial new age formula for stepping into prosperity thinking or abundance thinking, and then magically you have financial resource. In fact, I'm making an online course called Living in the Gift that's going to be addressing some of these issues. Because what you are offering is not valued by society in the way that, say, marketing toothpaste is valued, or keeping people healthy enough to work is valued. Like, the things that are valued are the things that can be the basis of, ultimately, as you know, as a Marxist, the basis of bank lending. That means that to do work that is not going to create sellable goods and services, there's only one business model, and that is gift. People have to give you money, even though what you do is not going to make them more money or help them make more money. I mean, sometimes it might, if you're a healer, like, and they might get back to work or something like that. But it's likely with the kind of work you do that the result of your healing will be that they quit their job and they want to become a healer too. And they're going to make less money too. So my business model is that ideally it's people who are in the matrix, transitioning out of it, who have a lot of the money inherited from their earlier lives or inherited from their ancestors, and who want to turn that money to a more beautiful purpose. For me, just even accepting that I am not here to earn a living by making it so that if someone gives me money, they're going to get something even more financially valuable in return. To accept that it is okay to live on patronage, on gift, that opens a gateway. And it asks me to look at the parts of myself that are not okay with that feel like I only deserve to be supported if I'm doing even more in return. And you can look at that, and it brings up pain, brings up grief. And it still doesn't mean that you will magically then, receive financial abundance. But it can be a thing that's in the way.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles, and thank you, Laura, for asking this question and for being vulnerable here in the space. Yeah.
And that's like one piece of it. Like there's a lot more I could say about that. I don't want to, reduce it to that one thing, but it's been very helpful to me to be okay with gift.
Right.
And
but it's actually also very helpful to hear the technicalities of, yes, it's people who are transferring out of the matrix. Yes, it is, really.
Right.
And it's interesting how many of us who are making a living are doing it by convincing people to leave the matrix.
Mm-hmm.
And that economically it's going to force a shift at some point.
Yeah. Ideally, like if I have, say, a retreat and 150 people come, I'd like normally, maybe 4/5 of them give me nothing or a token amount, and 1/5 give, several $1,000s each. Like that would be the way it should work. But often it's the people who can afford it the least who are the most generous.
Well, we know that from charity givings, poor people give a much higher percentage of that.
Mm-hmm. And that makes me ask, who's actually wealthy here? Because I think real wealth is feeling free to be generous, which is a kind of a feeling of being at home in the world. And if you have $100 million but don't feel that freedom, then you're not actually wealthy. And probably what you have is a monetary compensation for wealth, for a monetary compensation for a kind of a poverty of belonging and a poverty of being. And that's why no amount of money will ever satisfy the need. And then we blame it on greed, to get back to that. But what's greed? It's a compensation. It's an attempt to meet a need with something that cannot meet the need. So of course you want an endless amount. Yeah, and then we blame the person suffering from it, attacking the symptom. That's one of the patterns that we're stuck in as a culture.
Yeah.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Very important conversation. Yeah. All right, Laura, many blessings to you. Hope you have a beautiful day.
Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, let's see. Sue, I will bring you over now, Sue. And there's a question in the Q&A I want to ask as well. So I'll ask that after Sue asks her question.
Oh, hi.
Hi, Sue. How are you?
I spoke to you earlier, but here I am again. Yeah. Can you hear? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay? Yeah. Okay. And I've met Charles before a couple of times actually, and yeah, I was very struck by what you said, Charles, about the 5-year-old son. I have 2 grandchildren, one of 4 and one of 3, and I find I go sometimes into despair about the world, the innocence that they have, and the world as I know it to be. But on the other hand, I suppose I feel that what we can do is to help them connect in a way that they already are connecting with nature, because that's a natural feeling for children. And so to hug a tree, to breathe with a tree, to my little grandson started to kiss the tree as well after we were hugging it, to somehow enable them to follow these things that are already in them. I think you were saying something like that, Charles. So I'd be interested in any more pointers for how we can help young children to because the future is going to be also with them, and I feel that very strongly as a grandparent, that I want to do everything I can, but also to help them have something that they can obviously take forward themselves as a result, or just to facilitate. So I'd be interested, what else?
Okay.
Great question, Sue.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. One thing I do with my children is when I have an opportunity, I point them with questions toward empathy. Like, what do you think it's like to be that bird there? Or what do you think that tree is experiencing? Or if they have an altercation with another child, it's very important to me to avoid shaming them, and instead to ask, when you grabbed away Billy's toy, how do you think Billy felt? And to ask that in a way that's not calculated to hurt his feelings. And it's very, for me, it requires a lot of deliberate intention to not react with my pain and try to make him feel bad. But because if you come at a child that way, they're going to be defensive and they're going to willfully resist. So instead, to with genuine gentleness and curiosity, why do you think he's crying? And to provide a safe space where the child can feel how the other child is feeling without feeling bad about himself. One of the patterns of our culture is to try to control children by making them feel bad about themselves, which is really an exercise in rejection, parental or grandparental rejection. And then when they do something we approve of, then to reverse the rejection and give them approval instead. That is a form of trauma, because there's nothing more traumatic for a mammal than to be abandoned by the parent. So this is this kind of low-level, constant trauma that is pervasive in civilization. I mean, it's not just the West even. And the more that we receive that trauma, the less able we are to be empathic.
Yeah, that's great. Once my little grandson, he was taking away something, food or whatever, from his sister's plate, and I just said to him, "Is that a kind thing to do?" And he put it straight back. So there was no kind of, because we often use, I say kindness is the most important thing to them. And so that question, is that a kind thing to do, kind of gives them that reference point. And it's not so much about them, it's about the action. And is that a kind thing to do? So, yeah, and I agree about not shaming, because as a therapist, I see people all the time and who feel shamed, and then that creates a resentment. And as you were talking about trauma, I think this is so important. So if there's a way we can help people to be the best they can be, and help ourselves to be the best we can be, I don't mean best in achievement, but somehow the best self we can be, the kindest, most empathic self we can be, that's really what it's all about. And it's difficult because your mouth is already forming some other thing with children, and you have to kind of really keep that level of consciousness, which I find as a grandparent I can do more easily, and as a therapist. When I was a parent, I don't think I did that nearly as well, but now I'm so mindful of everything I say, everything I do with the children, and that's a good place to be. It's not easy.
Because even like, is that the kind thing to do, could carry a tone of voice that is
oh yes, it could, surely. Yes.
So it can be quite subtle.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Sue, for your question.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I love that answer. I have a 5-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old daughter, and I really love that. We're always talking about what are the birds and the trees, and I love what you said there. And like, if they go to kick an anthill, hold on, how are the ants going to feel if you do that? And that really stops them in their tracks, and they see, and they can so easily see it from the other perspective when they're young. They're just so open to that. Yeah. So there's a question in the Q&A from Delsbin. I don't know if that's your name or a combination of words, but the question is, and I'm going to rearrange it just a little bit for comprehension. For someone who has been conditioned by the Western world, are there any processes you would recommend to help us experience and understand the more than human world that is inherent in Indigenous wisdom? And maybe practices that might be helpful.
So yeah, like on the one hand, there are certainly, outdoors trainings and, shamanic workshops and plant medicine ceremonies and things like that. And I'm not going to like advocate one or another of those. I think that the appropriate experiences will come to you even as a result of asking that question. That just trying out that perception of the world is alive, that tree is perceiving me. It invites experiences that are not ordinary, because this is something that is just wanting to happen. It's bursting to happen. It is a mode of perception and cognition that is native to us, that's been suppressed. And when I tell a story in my book about I'm not going to tell it now, it's a little too long, but the results of coming to a tree and seeing the tree as a being. The tree is grateful. How would you feel if you've not been seen as a full being for a long time by somebody in your life or by many people in your life, and finally one day you're actually seen and someone says, well, how is it to be you? You feel really good. You feel grateful. And that is how non-human beings feel when we even begin to ask that question. So I would say to just experiment with it, to experiment. And sometimes like New Age ideology can kind of be an overlay that separates us a bit from the humble experience of seeing nature or a forest or a stream even, or a cloud or something as a being, or the sun. With the sun, that understanding is very available, like to the sun is shining on you, and in a moment you realize the sun is actually seeing you and in relationship to you. And just as the human heart is influenced by solar magnetism, solar electromagnetism, that the influence goes the other way too, and that the pain of our hearts hurts the sun. And just like even the suggestion of this that's coming from me right now begins to shift something. Reality begins to shift a little bit. And next time you see the sun or the moon, or next time you stand on the ground and feel the ground feeling you, it's like something, an awareness has been awakened or accelerated. And it's not like that you're going to get necessarily words coming into your head. It's not that kind of communication. It's what I would point to is more of just a sense of fellowship, a sense of seeing and being seen. Because while it is true in my story of the world that the sun is conscious, that a tree is conscious, that water is conscious, that consciousness is very different from human consciousness. And it is a mistake, I think, to project this kind of children's storybook consciousness, this anthropomorphizing of beings of nature. That's actually one of the things that separates us from, by humanizing them all, anthropomorphizing them all, that separates us from actual communion with these beings. I'm actually working on children's stories now. My next book might be children's stories.
Oh, wonderful.
That are not heavy-handed, but like subtly designed to awaken that way of thinking and seeing, and to kind of remedy the appalling shortcomings of almost all kids' books today. So this is something that's quite dear to my heart.
Yeah, thank you. So let's see. We have a few more hands raised. Are you okay to stay on, Charles, for maybe a couple more questions?
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So let's see. Jacqueline, I will bring you over now.
Mike, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Welcome, Jacqueline. Hi.
Oh, I'll do the video. There. Okay, hi. I read recently or heard that they've been doing some experiments with people who spend a lot of time on screens. Now, I don't remember if there was an age group or, how big the selection was or whatever, but they're finding that the more time you spend in front of screens, or maybe it was specifically cell phones, but anyway, screens, the less empathy, that you start losing empathy. Now, assuming that's true, I don't know if it is or not, how would you imagine that might come to be? How would that manifest? Because it scares me.
We'd have to dissect the research. I'm just thinking it probably matters a lot what you're looking at on the screen. And people who look at a lot of screens are probably doing a lot of mindless things on the screen. That could be part of it. But also when it's on a screen, it's mediated. That's why it's called media. And I think that the level of violence that we're subjected to in entertainment kind of, it shuts us down from empathy, because from even if we see something real on the screen, there's part of the brain that's like, well, that's just pixels on a screen. It's not real. The brain can't distinguish really between something in a horror movie or a violent movie and something that's real. And it's getting to the point now where you never know if it's been photoshopped or not.
Right.
Like this has happened in some of the stuff in Syria, where there's these images of, white helmets rescuing kids from poison gas attacks, and then like later you see like the same kid being rescued by 4 or 5 different people. And it's like, oh, wow, this was staged. But then like, do you even know that those photographs weren't faked? And like, it gets, I mean, this is a whole other topic, the different reality bubbles and the difficulty of knowing what's real anymore. But it's a related topic because maybe our brains get into a habit of discounting anything that comes to us through the screen. And that might be a barrier to empathy, and that might extend to personal relationships, like this kind of layer of cynicism over everything. So I don't know. Those are some of my thoughts about it.
So you're thinking that it's more content than the physical business of just viewing through the screen. Probably content being more of the reason for it.
It's
that would
probably
make
both.
sense to me.
Yeah. It's probably both, actually. Just because no matter what it is that you're seeing on a screen, there's part of you that knows that it's just on a screen. So
exactly.
We develop a habit of discounting things. And that could extend to discounting, even in real life, the experience of other people. And especially because today so much is, stage managed and spun and presented. Like when anything happens in politics, the news is not about what actually happened. The news is about what image this is giving and what message this is sending. And what narrative can be woven from this. So there's like this layer of self-referentiality that gets in the way of the real. And I think that this, on some level is a function, not just of the content, but of the medium itself and it extends to some extent even to traditional media, print media and stuff. Like it's a mediatization of reality. Some people might trace it all the way back to language itself. And that gets in the way of the immediate, non-mediated experience of reality. That gets really philosophical, but yeah, we could go there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thanks.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Okay, one more question here. Dexter, I will bring you over. Let's see. Trying to unmute you and it's not working. Oh, there we go. Okay. Welcome, Dexter. We should be able to hear you now. Oh, there you are.
Hi.
Hi, welcome.
Always a little bit of a technical thing when this happens. Like, is the mic working? Is the video working? But I just feel so connected with you, especially the things you've said, Charles. The perspectives that you've sort of opened up in our consciousness just move me. I mean, I'm just like, oh my God, I feel so connected with you and the host here and the world. It's a very spiritual experience, and the fact that it's being mediated by a bunch of neat technology doesn't detract from it. It's just amazing. Like, how could we be sitting together like this otherwise? I'm thrilled. So thank you. I'm share my aliveness in this moment with you, first of all. But what came up a little while ago as you were telling these beautiful stories is this sort of problem of determining which story do we believe, because there's an infinite number of stories we can make up, and many have been told throughout human history, and some work better than others. And, we tend to align with a cultural story that, is sort of like our story. But my question is, how do we evaluate the stories to determine which one's better, which one's worse, which one's more true, which one's more alive, more helpful? Because we have a plethora of stories to choose from, and they're not all good. I mean, it's like going to a restaurant. There's a whole bunch of stuff on the menu, and it's not all healthy. And how do you decide what to consume or what to sort of believe or enact or tell? And so it's this question of, I'm just surfacing this awareness that all stories aren't equal, and some are more beautiful, more true, more good, more helpful than others. And how do we discriminate between stories?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. Thank you for that. So there's two ways to answer that question. One is how do we, and the other is how should we. And you're kind of like halfway there in noticing that you cannot discriminate among these stories entirely based on evidence and reason. Most people think that they choose their beliefs because they are open-minded and rational, and they believe the one that has the most evidence and that is the most logical, and that people who disagree with them must be deficient in their capacity for reason and their open-minded ability to take in data. Everybody believes that about everybody else. Essentially, both sides of a political question believe the other side is stupid and ignorant. When you understand that, like say these political narratives, that whichever one you believe, you tend to find reinforcing evidence for that one, and that we carry unconscious biases that filter out information that doesn't conform to our beliefs. Then comes a moment of humility where you understand that I'm not actually choosing my beliefs based on the evidence. The choice is coming from somewhere else. There's even been academic research about this, where people are confronted with evidence that contradicts their beliefs, and then the results are observed. And what happens consistently is that when confronted with contradictory beliefs, people become even more convicted of what they thought, not less convicted, especially if they're well-educated. Well-educated people are more impervious to evidence that violates their beliefs. So the way I advocate choosing among stories or choosing among beliefs is, and the way I try to do it, is I choose the belief that corresponds to who I really am or who I want to become. There's a feeling of alignment, and I take it in. It's like trying a food. I take it in, and how do I feel taking this in? How do I feel inhabiting this story, or having this story inhabit me? Is this me? Is this where I want to be? Is this where I'm going? Or does this feel kind of like discordant? Does it feel like a down vibration? Does it feel, maybe it feels uncomfortable but true? It doesn't necessarily, I'm not saying like choose whatever's the most comfortable belief, but I think we can recognize a truth to something. And that this recognition it's not independent from evidence. It's not that we ignore evidence, but it's not dependent on evidence either. So yeah, you're right in saying that beliefs or stories, these are not purely intellectual constructs. Every belief or story is one layer of a state of being. It's like the cognitive layer of a state of being. And that's why New Age formulae about change your reality by changing your beliefs often end up being very disappointing, because they imply that you can change your beliefs through an act of will. But if beliefs are just a layer of something more holistic, then you can only change a belief if your state of being is in transition. And then and that's happening to a lot of people now. Like many people are undergoing a breakdown or a metamorphosis of the person that they have been for a long time. when that is underway, then the time has come to change a belief. And people will be attracted to beliefs that would have seemed absurd to them before this breakdown begins to happen. So, yeah, I'd like to summarize. It's to understand that the story is more than just a story. That it could be something trivial, but if it's something like major story about the world or about yourself, to recognize that as a choice of who you are. Does it embody who I am, who I want to be, or a possibility that I've seen and experienced in myself? A world that I'm ready to live into. And maybe it does and it doesn't. Like maybe part of you is ready to step into a story that the world is abundant and as I give, so I shall receive. And maybe there's another part of you that is totally afraid to go there. And you're not ready for that. So what do you do then? Do you try to change your belief by force, hoping that reality will then conform to it? Another approach is to simply give attention to the feeling of readiness or the yearning to move into that belief. And in the same way that giving attention to the belief that nature and non-human beings are watching us generates the confirmatory reality of that, in the same way, our attention to the state of being that we are pregnant with, that wants to emerge, will strengthen it and nourish it and generate experiences that help to bring it more fully into manifestation. That was a bit of a mouthful. I hope it was
well, what I really got from it was, and this is my interpretation, but what I got from it is you take in the story and you see how it makes you feel. If it makes you bigger and more loving and more alive and more connected, it's the effect the story has on your being.
Yep.
Does it enhance and expand your being, or does it limit and, maybe make you angry or fearful or whatever? So there's the effect the story has on your being, which is very, the subjective part, which is very important. But I'm also thinking there must be a real reality out there. I mean, there must be a state of being that just is separate from my thoughts or feelings about it. Like there really is, something going on with the climate. There really is a sun that puts out energy. There really is, physics. I mean, really seems to be something like that going on. So it's not just my feelings of how I am, but there should be a shared reality that we all are inhabiting, not just on a physical level, but on a, maybe a spiritual or cultural or whatever level we manifest on there. I can't just accept, if I feel good, if it makes me feel like, okay, I'm the reincarnation of Buddha or something, it's like, wow, I feel very good. But somehow I'm not paying the rent. I'm not getting along with my friends. I'm eating garbage. It's making me sick, whatever. So I'm just saying there's different aspects of reality that seem to impact the trueness of a story, besides just how expansive it makes me feel when I believe it.
Yes. So the thing that helps me navigate, this gets really metaphysical and mysterious, but
cool.
It's to understand that even if it is true that reality is a story and that we can choose among different stories, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the important thing is to understand that we are not the makers of these stories. So a story's origin and truth are not dependent very much on the person believing or disbelieving the story. Stories come, they are born and they have a lifespan and they come into being and they get senescent and they die. They are true for a while, they become no longer true. So you can try to believe that you are the reincarnation of Buddha. But if that's not a true story, then no amount of will is going to make it true. It might be, so you might have a menu of stories that contain some truth in them. And there might be some stories that you're concocting that on some level you know that that's bullshit. So the sensing of truth in something can be a practice. The winnowing of truth from wishful thinking can be a practice that you can recognize with time. As for like the story that there is a reality out there separate from story, sometimes you have weird experiences that make you question, well, what exactly is the boundary between story and reality? I'm not sure if I want to torpedo my credibility by invoking any of these stories of really, really weird shit, but I'll just say that some people report experiences that just totally contradict almost everything we know about what's real. And whether or not there is something out there beyond story, we don't know where that thing ends, where the hard objective reality ends and subjective interreality begins. But if you follow quantum mechanics, I mean, it gets, the idea of a reality outside of ourselves on the basic level becomes questionable. And you could say that, all of this seemingly external reality is actually just information that itself is a function of a relationship. So again, like we could get really metaphysical with that, but I think that you can over time and with experience, you can trust yourself to recognize what is a comforting fantasy that makes you, that pleases the ego and makes you feel good about yourself, but not even in a really satisfying way. And what is the truth that, as you said, makes you feel alive, makes you feel beautiful, that might even be uncomfortable, but it feels true. So I think you've basically said it. Part of like the doubt that you're bringing into it could be coming from, dare I really exercise my sovereign power to choose the story and the being that I'm stepping into? What if I'm just deluding myself? And you can trust that if you are deluding yourself, that delusion will manifest as incongruous data points that get more and more painful the more that you deny them. Such as you mentioned, my finances are falling apart, my health is falling apart, my wife left me, et cetera, et cetera. Like, if you're trying to hold an untrue story that does not align with where you are supposed to go next, reality is going to interfere. The generator of stories is going to give you more and more data points that the untruth of the story will manifest in your experience. I'll stop for now. There's more and more subtlety around it, but maybe that's a starting point at least.
Yeah,
thank you, Charles. It's been really beautiful connecting with you.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Thank you, Dexter.
Yeah.
Thanks for attending. Hope you have a wonderful day.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, bye.
Yeah, I hope people don't think that I'm like some master of metaphysics and whatever I said, just take it in and use it as grist for the mill. Yeah.
Yes, no, it was very interesting, and it's, these are the things we need to consider. So, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Charles, for being a part of Embracing Radical Change and for sharing your wisdom and your expertise and your thoughts here. Really, really appreciate you being here in this group, in this conference.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jocelyn. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, wonderful. Have a great day, Charles.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, bye.